Hello, how you doing? I hope that you are doing well. I'm really happy and excited to talk to you today about the elections. Now, I know that it is that time of the year for many people. It is election season, of course, but especially with election, there are a lot of challenges that comes with it. And so one of the things I wanted to do today will be to go over some of the, you could call it election survival guide, and to kind of take you through some of the things that you might do to help you cope with the stress of the season. So I know that from probably from now until the time of the election and the days that follow, there will be a bit of stress for most people that either are nervous about the election results or maybe are kind of expecting perhaps their candidates are winning and maybe they lost, or just the overall post-election shock or stress that might come as a result of that. Now, if you are in this category and you're worried about the election results, you really want your candidate to win, and maybe it doesn't turn out the way you want it, or perhaps your candidate wins and you're overwhelmed with joy, and which also kind of palpitates to some kind of stress. If at all that happens in any way, I think this video is for you. As you know, the 2024 U.S. presidential election, I think it's become, of course, a significant source of stress for many Americans, not just Americans, even people around the world. In fact, according to APA, the American Psychological Association, they conducted like a survey to kind of get an estimate of adults who maybe might be saying that the election has been a source of stress for them. And they found that about 69% of adults, U.S. adults, kind of cited the election as the presidential election as a major stressor. In fact, they also found that I think about 77% of them kind of expressed concern about the nation's future. So, of course, this becomes really important. It's clear that the election itself is a source of stress for a lot of Americans. But I want to talk about some of the factors that might be contributing to this stress. Some would call it election-related stress. One, I think, would be, the fact that there is high stakes. Currently now, I think there's really high stakes, especially when you're dealing with critical issues such as reproductive rights. You have one candidate, a presidential candidate that supports the reproductive rights of women, the other also that might be against that. So, of course, that would become a bone of contention in an election like this. On the other hand, especially, of course, when you think about those that might be pro-life and those that might not be. And so there is a really high stake. The other also topic of interest or topic that might be causing this stress might also be the fact that issue around healthcare, where we have different candidates kind of preferring different solutions about what that might look like, for the future. And of course, the economy as well. These are really some of the matters or issues that are at the forefront, which of course leads most people, you and I essentially, to feel that the outcome of the election would impact our lives. And of course, it would definitely impact our life, because if the president makes a policy that restricts or bans, let's say, things like abortion, it means that also have implication for women. If the president kind of supports abortion, that also has implication as well for our religious values as well. Even with healthcare as well, it becomes also one of those issues that we should, I guess, look out for in this election. Now, even that is why that is the case. I think the other issue that we should also bear in mind that has been one of the factors that might be contributing to this stress for most people, I think, would be the overall political polarization, essentially, the division, especially between the Republican and the Democratic parties, which over years have kind of intensified. Of course, with Trump coming in as a 45th president, that also kind of exacerbated the tension between the two groups. Of course, this also causes a huge strain on personal relationships and with communities. In fact, to the point that in some workplaces, if you, by the mere fact that a colleague or a friend is voting a candidate that is not your choice, that in fact, there's some research that has been done to show that that has become one of the things that have strained personal relationships, even in households where there might be two partners that might be voting for different candidates or leaning towards different candidates. It also kind of impacts the dynamics of that relationship. So this polarization, and essentially, it's definitely one of the things that would be causing stress for most people. The other thing also would be, I think, just overall uncertainty and just miscommunication. Especially with the advent of social media, turning on your Facebook page, you start to see tons of information. Some are very misleading, some are to some degree relatively accurate. And so for some reason, the uncertainty that comes with having floods of information, things about the election, definitely, as you would expect, that proliferation of misinformation would cause some kind of anxiety for most people. In fact, especially with AI-generated content, you would anticipate or expect that that would, of course, heighten public anxiety and, to some degree, erode trust in the electoral process. So this becomes the major cause of this. And in fact, if I'm to think about what it's the main issue, I think that's the fact that there is problem with uncertainty for most people, where they're not sure what is true and what is not true, especially now that we have AI generated content floating around the internet. And also the problem with information, especially with external states trying to intercept and interrupt the election. So it becomes really fundamental to I guess, consider how to address or avoid these three fundamental factors that might be causing political stress for you. Whether you are concerned about the high stake and what is at stake essentially with this election, whether it's with healthcare, with reproductive rights, with the economy, or even with migration as well, which is also a big one as well. Or you're concerned with the division in the country. For most people, they are good patriots, and for them, the frustration and the stress is just the fact that this election has sort of exacerbated the divide between liberals and maybe conservatives, because it's no longer politics as usual. It's more or less something different, unfortunately. To some degree, maybe for you, your stress or anxiety might be as a result of the uncertainty and misinformation due to what you pay attention to on social media. But if this is the case, if you are impacted by any of this kind of problems or any of this kind of issues, I think there are strategies to manage this stress, especially stress that had to do with this election. I think one of the first things that you should do, I would encourage you to do that, would be to try to limit the way you consume news these days. And that could be as simply as just maybe watch news once a day, or maybe just read something once a day, or subscribe to a particular platform that you trust their news media, or perhaps just limit it completely, right? But I think it's almost impossible to say that you should cut out news, right? Because you need to know what's happening. So perhaps what you could do might be to set specific times to check the news updates in order to avoid becoming overwhelmed with what's happening. Just that could help. That could mean in a day, just paying attention to the news for like 30 minutes and just read around just to get a sense of what's happening. But I also think the other thing you could do would be perhaps to engage in practices. If you're not religious, this might not be for you. But if you are, engage in religious, spiritual practices that can help you to calm your nerves or help you to, whether it's meditate, but just something to help you to maintain focus on the present and to reduce anxiety. In fact, research also supports that religious coping, it's an important mechanism through which we can actually manage things like anxiety, even depression, or even overall anxiousness around what's happening in the world. And so for you, if that's what really can help you, you turn to prayer when you're anxious or just stressing about the election, turn to God in prayer and commit the election to God's hands. I think that's also one way to help you manage the stress. Or read your Bible and focus on God's promises for you, right? Or pick up a religious book or things that would really be very motivational and encouraging for you. Things that will help you to become hopeful, regardless of what the current condition is, right? Or even the outcome of the election, regardless of that. So I think engaging in religious practices or coping through religious resources, I think it's important. But also, the other thing I think you should do, and very important to do this, would be to set boundaries in discussions. Now, if you're the type of person that is easily triggered due to conversations around elections, perhaps it's time to kind of stay away from those kind of conversations, since it's probably not healthy for you, right? If you're the kind of person that it's around people that might not be voting for your own candidate, and that really triggers something in you, perhaps it's time to also stay away from those folks and just set boundaries around conversations that you have, and to protect yourself essentially, and try to be cautious about engaging in political conversations. Like my neighbors, we actually have a podcast that we do every Saturday, and it's funny because during the podcast we made a conscious decision not to talk about the U.S. election, and not because we don't have favorite candidates or they won't be voting. They both will be voting. They're American citizens, but myself, I'm not an American citizen, but I'm a resident. And so we decided we made a decision not to record anything on the election because of the tension that might create in our conversation, even though personally I don't mind. So I think it's important to be cautious about engaging in political conversations, especially with those that might be holding opposing views. And you do this because you want to kind of prevent unnecessary stress, right? But I think beyond this, the other thing you could do, this is just from a physiological point of view, will be to stay physically active, right? Engage in regular exercise, which research shows that exercise definitely helps to alleviate stress, right? And also it supports our overall well-being. So that could be something you could think about doing in this season. Instead of debating about Trump or Kamala Harris, why not go to the gym and work out and stay fit, and that might be a good way to kind of mentally focus on your health, but also most importantly, if you're struggling and perhaps all the things I've mentioned might not be helpful for you or might not even be useful for you, then I think perhaps it might be time that you seek professional support, right? If election anxiety really significantly impacts your daily life to the point that you can't really breathe or you can't go to work without being triggered, because maybe your colleagues are voting for an opposing candidate, maybe you should consider seeing a therapist, right? A mental health professional for guidance. That could be a symptom of so many other things. It could be a symptom of PTSD that you've not addressed. It could be a symptom of a whole lot of things, anxiety, suppressed regression as well. It could be a symptom of so many things. So I would encourage you to try to see a therapist to help you walk through what might be happening. Now, on a more practical level, aside from managing election-related stress, I think there are practical things that you could do, especially when the result comes out and maybe, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but just maybe your candidate doesn't win. Now, if that happens, it's not the end of the world, right? I think there are things that you could do to cope with the election results. Now, I think the first thing you could do, if that becomes your story or your case in the next 4 or so days, in the next couple of days after the election results have been released, I'm recording this video on the 1st of November, so it will be 4 days from now. But perhaps I have to upload this maybe 2 days to the election or so. Regardless, if the election result doesn't turn out the way that you want it to turn out, or even if it turned out the way you want it to turn out, there are practical things that you could do to cope with the election results. One, I think, is to accept the outcome. Now, this is very important because I know that part of the tension and the division in both parties, both the Republican and the Democratic Party so far, has been as a result of election denial, where, for example, during the last election, Trump was denying that he lost, that his vote was stolen, and that became the very thing that defined the whole presidency of Biden, which was kind of unfortunate because I felt like that noise kind of clothed um, his achievements and some of the things that he did, he was doing as a president. Where as a president, some were even calling him that he was illegitimate, which is kind of unfair, in my opinion. But anyway, if for some reason, if for some reason that it turns out that your candidate is not the elected in, I think it's important to accept the result, acknowledge the result, and focus on areas where you can make a positive impact. Now, that could mean a whole lot of things. For example, if the election result turns out to your favor, I think you could also reach out to those that might want to vote the other candidate and just check up on them, right? Try, regardless of what the result is, to make have a positive impact. Reach out to people that might have been thinking about voting a different candidate and see how they're doing, right? Regardless of who wins this election. The other thing you could do that I think is also very important would be to try to stay engaged, regardless of the outcome. So if your candidate loses the election, don't be alienated from your community, from your friends, just because they voted a different candidate. I think that would be a disservice to you, and because at the end of the day, people don't owe you their vote, right? There could be in households where husband and wife can vote for two different candidates. It's okay, right? So I think it's important as much as possible, try to stay engaged, participate in community activities, or even advocacy groups that really aligns with your values, and you do this to kind of shape and foster a sense of purpose and control, especially if you've lost the election, and you could advocate for your candidate for the next election. It's not a do or die affair, essentially. So stay engaged, okay? The other thing also you could do, maybe I'll stop with this last thing, example, would be to try as much as possible, whatever be the outcome of this election, to maintain social connection, your social connections. If you lost, if the election didn't go to in your favor, try to, for example, lean on supportive relationships, lean on friends, on your spouse, on your father or mom, your parents or your siblings, people that you're close to. Lean on them to kind of navigate the post-election emotions that you might have. And this will help, especially if your candidate loses the election, this will help you to reduce whatever feeling of isolation that you might feel, or feeling like that you've lost the election. It's just an election. I know it's a big election, but at the end of the day, there would have to be a victor and a loser in the election. So if your candidate loses the election, that's okay. It's not the end of the world. There's another election in the next, I think, 4 or 5 years, and you can also vote your candidate, and maybe they can make a better case at that time, okay? And so I think when you do all these things, I think it would hopefully help you to better manage whatever stress that might come out of this election season, and also I think it could also help you to adapt to the outcomes of the election in a healthy manner. So Don't beat yourself up for your candidate loses. My hope is that your candidate wins, right? But that also means that the other person, his or her candidate loses. So there's really no win-win here, you know. But regardless of who wins this election, my encouragement to you would be to do yourself a favor and consider some of the things that I've just said in this video. Accept the outcome of the election results. Try to stay engaged. Try to maintain your relationship connections. And at the end of the day, maybe limit news consumption, especially if that kind of might not be good for your mental health. But either way, I'm excited, looking forward to who will be our next president, but also wanted you to also make sure you take care of yourself and stay safe, okay? And make sure you take care of yourself, and I hope that you, have a wonderful week, and make sure you voted if you've not voted. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.